My father was a businessman until I found out that he was using schemes and fraud, and then I found out that I was adopted. So I'm Kevin. I'm 30. I work as an auditor for a mid-sized financial firm based in Seattle. I've always kind of been the outlier in my family. While they're knee-deep in the world of construction, project bids, site visits, and all that, I've spent the last 8 years chasing down financial irregularities and Excel spreadsheets. My dad, Thomas, owns a construction company that's done pretty well for itself. Government contracts, multi-million-dollar deals, lots of shaking hands with local politicians. It's the kind of empire that looks humble from the outside, but moves quietly with big money behind it. Everyone always assumed I'd join in the future. That line's practically a family motto. My mom used to say it at every barbecue when someone asked what I did. Kevin's finding his way, but we know he'll circle back to the family business someday. And I just smile because, yeah, what else are you supposed to do? The thing is, I never really wanted to circle back. I didn't want to walk job sites in steel-toed boots or nod along during conversations about soil grading and permits. My dad's world is just loud, dominating. It's all backslaps and chest puffing and knowing someone who knows someone. I liked my quiet little office, my color-coded spreadsheets, my routine. But that wasn't the family way. And then there's Haley, my younger sister by 2 years. Blonde, charming, perfect teeth, and perfect timing. She's the kind of person who can walk into a room and get offered 3 jobs and 2 free drinks without trying. Daddy's favorite, without a doubt. She works in PR for my dad's company, but it's more than that. She is the company's public face. Award ceremonies, networking galas, media statements. Haley's front and center for all of it. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the thoughtful one. Haley was the golden light that never dimmed, and Thomas adored her for it. I don't even think it was malicious, just effortless favoritism. She could do no wrong. I always felt like a backup plan, like I was there in case the prodigy stumbled, which she never did. Things started shifting about a year ago. My firm got a new client, small real estate outfit with a lot of development overlap with government-funded construction. I didn't think much of it until I recognized a name in one of the disbursement ledgers, a subcontractor linked to my dad's company. That wasn't unusual. Thomas's business has tendrils in a lot of city projects. What caught my attention was how the numbers weren't adding up. I flagged it internally, like I'm supposed to, and a different team got assigned to investigate deeper. I stepped away officially. Conflict of interest. But unofficially, I started digging. I don't even know why. Curiosity? Gut feeling? Maybe some old itch from years of feeling like the family's ghost employee. Whatever it was, I pulled threads where I knew I shouldn't. And that's when I found it. Well, not it, but enough. Sloppy accounting, off-the-books payments. What looked like inflated subcontractor invoices for work that probably didn't happen. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was smoke. Dense, ugly smoke. I didn't tell anyone. Not at work, not at home. I sat with it for weeks. Tried to convince myself I was imagining it. That it was some vendor error or bad math on a form. But I knew better. And eventually, so did my boss. A few weeks later, my manager called me into his office. He was polite, but firm. Said a formal review had been opened. That I was to recuse myself from anything connected to Thomas's company. That the partners were involved. This wasn't just a blip. It was bigger, potentially legal. I asked how they'd found out, and he just said quietly, "We're watching all the files, Kevin, including the ones you looked at." When I got home that night, Haley was sitting in my apartment. Not texting, not calling, just there. Legs crossed, wine in hand, like she belonged. She gave me that same grin she always used when we were kids, and she was about to get away with something. "Hey, big brother," she said. "We need to talk." I remember how heavy the air felt. Like I was walking into a trap I hadn't even realized I'd set. "I know what you're doing," she said. "And I get it. You're an auditor. You see numbers, you want them to add up. It's your thing. But this isn't your thing. This is family." I didn't say anything. She leaned forward, all calm and rehearsed. "You know Dad's built something real. Something that provides for people. For us. For a lot of people. It's complicated, yeah, but that's how this world works. You poke around, you could bring it all down." I asked her point blank, "Are you saying it's true?" She shrugged. "I'm saying you need to think about what matters." Then she stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out. Left her half-empty wine glass on my table like it was a signature. A week later, I was called into a closed-door meeting with legal counsel from my firm. I wasn't in trouble yet, but they asked me if I had any contact with my father or sister regarding the flagged accounts. I lied. I said no, and I hated myself for it. The next time I saw my parents was at a charity golf event. I hadn't planned on going, but my firm sponsored one of the holes, and I was dragged along. Thomas shook my hand like nothing was wrong, called me champ, told some story about when I used to ride on the backhoe as a kid. Everyone laughed. Haley winked at me across the buffet table. My mother never even made eye contact. That night, I sat in my car for over an hour. Engine off. No music. Just silence. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. We don't give up our own. That's what my dad always said. I think, for the first time, I realized it wasn't a promise. It was a warning. It was a Thursday evening when we all gathered at the house in Kirkland for one of those semi-obligatory family dinners. My mom had made her usual lemon chicken. Haley brought wine from some overpriced local vineyard she was obsessed with. And my dad was in his usual post-golf good mood, still wearing his branded polo like it was a badge of honor. Conversation floated around work, politics, and which cousin had embarrassed themselves most recently at a wedding. Nothing unusual until dessert. We were on the back patio, and Thomas leaned back in his chair, swirling the last of his whiskey, and gave me that look he always gives when he's about to ask for something he's already decided I'll say yes to. "Hey, Kev," he said casually, like it had just occurred to him. "You think you could take a quick look at one of our contractors? Something weird's going on with their billing. Accounting flagged a couple of things, but I don't think they're reading it right. Thought maybe you could give it a once-over." At first I thought it was a joke. He never brought business to me like that. Not directly. And definitely not with this tone, all friendly-like, as if we'd been working side by side for years. But curiosity got the better of me. I asked him which contractor, and he rattled off a name I recognized vaguely from some of the public bid sheets. Nothing huge, mid-level subcontractor, mostly involved in utilities and prep work on federal build-outs. "I just want to make sure we're not overpaying," he said, but there was a tightness around his eyes that didn't match the casual tone. "You know how it is. Too many people in the pipeline. Things get fuzzy." I told him I'd take a look, expecting maybe some sloppy invoicing, a duplicated purchase order, something benign. The next day, I got an email from Haley, technically from the PR department, but CC&G someone from operations, giving me temporary internal access to the contractor's payment history, along with a nondescript spreadsheet and a PDF summary report. It felt too neat, too easy. Right away, something was off. The spreadsheet looked polished, but the numbers told a different story. The amounts listed under consulting fees were irregular, flat payments in equal amounts on the same day every month, like payroll, except they weren't tied to any documented service. I traced one of the payees listed and ran the company name through the Washington State UBI registry. Nothing came up. I checked again under alternate spellings. Still nothing. So I dug deeper. The reports attached to those payments were placeholders. Generic text, duplicated across different weeks with only the dates changed. No project notes, no field inspections, nothing you'd expect for six-figure payments. That's when I checked the signatory fields. The invoices were approved by two different names. I never heard of either. I sent a quick message to the admin listed in the access log, just asking if they could confirm who these two people were, position, department, anything. They replied within the hour with one sentence. "We don't have anyone by those names in our system." That alone didn't confirm anything. Maybe they were external consultants. Maybe they were using aliases for some reason. But it set off something in me. I pulled more records. This time, I filtered for payment destinations. And there it was. Multiple disbursements routed through an intermediary account based in Nevada, then again through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. I traced the transaction metadata as far as the internal logs would let me, and sure enough, the funds disappeared past that point. No record of final use, no confirmation receipts, just outgoing wire transfers with reference IDs and intentionally vague memos. Things like retainer fee and third-party review. Even worse, I noticed that some of the earlier reports, quarterlies mostly, tied to the same contractor, had vanished altogether from the shared directory. The timestamps were there. The system had logged them. But when I tried to open the files, I got error messages saying they were no longer available or access restricted. I checked the version history, thinking maybe they'd been edited or moved. But the audit trail was blank past a certain date. Like they'd been wiped clean, not archived or reclassified, just deleted. At that point, I wasn't thinking about the family anymore. I was thinking like an auditor. This wasn't a clerical mistake. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was systemic, coordinated. The kind of paper trail you leave when you're hoping no one asks questions. But someone had asked. My dad. Or maybe he hadn't asked at all. Maybe he'd been warning me. The question was never about the contractor. It was about me. About whether I'd look and walk away, or look and keep digging. That night, I shut my laptop, sat in the dark of my apartment, and stared at the screen reflection in the window. I didn't know what the hell I'd just stepped into. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a test. 2 weeks after that dinner, I was still looking over documents. I told myself I was just being thorough, that I was tying up loose ends out of professional curiosity, but the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Every day after work, I would come home, pour myself a drink, and dived back into those files like I was trying to solve some puzzle that had no solution. It started eating at me. The fake names, the missing reports, the money moving offshore without explanation, none of it sat right. One evening, I was combing through a payment reference log when I noticed a routing code that hadn't been there before. It looked like a normal transfer, but the metadata included a fund name I didn't recognize. Something about it caught my eye. It wasn't tied to any known vendor or listed in any public registry I could find. That alone would have been enough to flag it. But when I dug deeper into the routing details, I found a registration ID attached to the destination account. It was a company registered in the British Virgin Islands. The name was generic, one of those shell companies that sounded like it could be anything. Apex Global Holdings Limited. But what stopped me cold wasn't the name. It was the listed owner of the account, Madeline Foster. My mother. My mother who, as far as I knew, had never run a business in her life. The same woman who used to tell me she didn't understand any of that tax nonsense and left the finances entirely to my father. I stared at her name in the shareholder registry like I was reading it in a dream. I double-checked it. Then again, I pulled the offshore documentation, looked at the scanned registration form, the digital signature. It was real. Her name, her passport, her contact information, all of it matched. That fund had received over $3.2 million in the past 18 months. The transfers were spaced out, disguised as payments for logistics coordination, site consulting, and operational oversight. But there were no corresponding service records, no deliverables, no paper trail justifying any of it. It wasn't a vendor. It wasn't even a real business. It was a funnel. I went back to the contractor, the one my father had asked me to check out. Turns out, it wasn't a contractor at all. It was a service company on paper, registered to a virtual office in Spokane, but its listed address was a mailbox drop, and the phone number went straight to voicemail. The company had no employees, no licenses, no history of actual field work. It existed to move money, nothing more. And that's when the bigger picture started coming into focus. These weren't just phantom payments. This was money being siphoned from budgeted city projects, public works sites, infrastructure upgrades, beautification grants, and rerouted through this ghost contractor, then laundered through offshore accounts registered in my mother's name. The amounts weren't small. Each transfer was careful, calculated, just low enough to stay under the threshold that might automatically trigger an audit. But over time, it added up to millions. As I traced the funds backward, another pattern started to emerge. Several of the projects involved in the disbursements had been awarded through special municipal bids, expedited approvals, fast-tracked environmental reviews, sudden shifts in zoning exemptions. Most of them were greenlit by the same small committee out of the mayor's office. And one name kept appearing. Randall Keyes, Deputy Commissioner for Infrastructure and longtime friend of my father's. I remembered the guy from barbecues and golf tournaments. He used to bring me model cars when I was a kid. I hadn't seen him in years, but his name was listed on internal memos pushing for approvals, bypassing oversight, accelerating funding timelines. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. My father had organized this. He had built an entire mechanism inside the city's construction pipeline, a network of front companies, shell accounts, and insider approvals designed to bleed money from public contracts and wash it clean through offshore funds. And my mother, knowingly or not, was holding one of the accounts at the end of the chain. That night, I sat at my kitchen table until 2 a.m. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen while all the pieces clicked into place. I was holding evidence that could bring down a company, a city office, and my own family. And it all started because someone asked me to check out a contractor. I waited a few days before I said anything. Not because I was unsure. I wasn't. But because I needed to see him face to face. I needed to look my father in the eye when I laid it out. There was still a small part of me that hoped there would be some explanation, some way he could make it all make sense. I knew it was unlikely, but I had to try. I called him and said we needed to talk. Just the two of us. He told me to come by the house Saturday morning. My mother would be out with Haley, he said, so we'd have the place to ourselves. He didn't sound nervous or suspicious, just tired. Like a man who was already preparing for a conversation he didn't want to have. I showed up right at 10. The living room was clean in that way that meant the housekeeper had just been there. Everything smelled like lemon polish and old wood. My dad was in his usual weekend jeans and a flannel, holding a mug of coffee like it was just another day. We sat down at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop and loaded the files. No preamble. No build-up. I didn't want to give him time to dodge. I just said, I know. He looked at the screen, then back at me. Said nothing. I clicked through the transactions, the offshore account in the British Virgin Islands, the shell company in Spokane, the scanned forms with my mother's name on them, the network of fake invoices and missing reports, the city project approvals traced to Randall Keyes. Still nothing. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just sipped his coffee like he was watching the weather report. I closed the laptop. You asked me to look at this contractor. So I did. And what I found is a money laundering operation you've been running through your own business. $3.2 million moved offshore under mom's name. All of it skimmed off budget-funded projects. And you used city contacts to help it along. I waited. And finally, he set the mug down, folded his hands in front of him, and said quietly, "You shouldn't have looked." I stared at him. "That's all you have to say?" He nodded once. "You should have minded your own business." There was no anger in his voice, no raised tone, just this cold detachment that made my skin crawl. "I'm your son," I said, my voice low. "How could you involve mom in this? How could you drag our family into something like this?" That's when he finally looked at me, really looked at me, and something shifted in his face, like a mask dropping. "You're not our real son." At first, I didn't understand. The words hit, but they didn't register. I thought he meant it metaphorically, like a disowning, like a betrayal line thrown out in anger. But he just kept going. "You were adopted. You were 6 months old. Your birth parents were some couple from Oregon who couldn't handle a kid. We never told you because we didn't think it mattered. But since you've decided to act like this, like some outsider trying to rip the family apart, you might as well know." I just sat there. The room spun. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the faint tick of the wall clock, my own breath suddenly too loud. Everything else went silent. "You've always been different," he added. "Quiet. Calculating. Like you were waiting for a reason to turn on us. Now I see it clear as day." I managed to ask, "So all this time, you just let me believe I was your son?" He shrugged. "You were. In name. You had a roof, a good education. We never treated you different until now. But blood? Blood is business, not DNA. And this business, this family, it doesn't concern you anymore." I stood up. My legs felt numb. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Everything I knew, everything I had been raised to believe, had just been wiped away with a single sentence. He didn't try to stop me. Didn't ask me to sit down. Just watched me walk out of the kitchen like it was a Tuesday morning and I was heading to work. That was the last thing I heard him say. "You're not part of the family." No yelling. No apologies. Just silence. The kind that doesn't leave. The morning after that conversation with my father, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. It wasn't the usual flood of work emails or calendar reminders. It was direct messages, missed calls from unknown numbers, even a few vague texts from old college contacts I hadn't heard from in years. Something felt off immediately. I got dressed and headed into the office early, hoping maybe it was just some fire drill or internal miscommunication. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I knew I was wrong. The front desk clerk barely looked at me, just pointed to the elevator and said, "They're waiting for you upstairs." When I reached the floor, 2 men in suits I didn't recognize were already seated outside the conference room. Legal. One of the senior partners, Martin, stood at the door, arms crossed. He didn't greet me, just motioned for me to go inside. There were 5 people in the room. Legal counsel, a compliance officer, the HR director, my manager, and someone from the executive team I had only spoken to once. They told me to sit. No small talk. No smiles. "Kevin," Martin started, voice clipped and formal. "As of this morning, our firm has received a formal complaint from Foster Development Group alleging that you illegally accessed and removed confidential financial records from their servers during the period you were granted internal access as part of a limited scope audit. They have also filed a civil lawsuit naming you personally for damages related to data theft." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry. "They claim you attempted to distribute proprietary information to outside parties, competitors specifically. In fact, several individuals have come forward stating you approached them directly with offers to share internal documents for compensation." It was like I was watching the scene unfold from outside my own body. I asked to see the complaint. They handed me a printed packet, 10 pages, filed the night before. My name all over it. Specific dates listed. Times I had accessed the internal system. Screenshots of metadata showing file downloads. None of it was fake, exactly. But it was manipulated, twisted just enough to make it look like I had done something illegal. I told them it wasn't true. That yes, I had looked at the documents, but I was asked to. That Thomas Foster himself, my own father, had requested the audit. That I had flagged the issues internally first, like I was supposed to. They didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. Or worse, they didn't want to believe me. Then came the final blow. "We've also received a formal complaint from one of our clients who claims you reached out to them with sensitive financial data and proposed a private consulting arrangement. They've since provided a written statement." I asked who. They refused to say, but I already knew it didn't matter. Someone was lying for him. Maybe more than one. People my father had leaned on, called in favors from. The kind of favors you can't turn down if you want to keep your permits, your contracts, your reputation. He was covering his tracks, and I was being buried under them. I was suspended from work pending investigation. Not fired, yet, but effectively paralyzed. My email access was cut off by noon. My keycard stopped working. My firm's name disappeared from my LinkedIn before the end of the day, like I had never existed there at all. That night, I got a call from one of the junior analysts I had mentored over the last year. He sounded nervous, like he didn't want to be speaking to me. "Kevin," he said, "I just wanted you to know, they're saying a lot of stuff. That you were trying to leak information. That you've been under review for months. I don't believe it, man, but people are scared. No one wants to get dragged in." I thanked him for calling, then sat in the dark for a long time after that, staring at the wall. Within 24 hours, my name had been turned into a liability. My father hadn't just cut me out of the family. He had declared war, and this was his first strike. He was going to ruin me. And worse, he was going to make it look like I did it to myself. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on my manager's face, the packet of accusations with my name stamped across the top, the echo of my father's voice telling me I wasn't even their real son. By morning, something had settled in me. Not rage, exactly. Something colder, sharper. I wasn't going to go down like this. The first person I called was someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Noah Klein. We went to college together. He had been editor-in-chief of the campus paper back then, always chasing stories that no one wanted printed. Now he was working as a freelance investigative journalist, mostly covering political corruption and financial crime. The last I heard, he had broken a story about a state senator funneling grant money through a veterans nonprofit. I still had his number, buried deep in my contacts, and to my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. "Kev," he said. "Man, it's been forever." I didn't waste time. I told him everything, start to finish. My voice was steady, but inside I felt like a wire stretched to its breaking point. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, "You got proof?" "Yes," I said, "and I need your help putting it all together." That afternoon, I drove to his apartment in Capitol Hill with a flash drive in my pocket and 2 manila folders packed with printed files, screenshots, transaction logs, and everything I had pulled before my access was revoked. He cleared off a table, and we got to work. We spent the next 5 days building a dossier. Noah brought in a retired financial crimes investigator he'd worked with before to help us structure the evidence properly. We created timelines, mapped out the money flow, cross-referenced vendor logs with permit approvals and public records. We built a narrative that showed how Foster Development Group, through a network of shell contractors and friendly city officials, had rerouted over $3 million in public funds into offshore accounts. My mother's name was on the beneficiary list. Randall Keyes, the deputy commissioner, was tied to multiple rushed approvals. It was no longer just suspicious. It was undeniable. At the same time, I reached out to a lawyer named Catherine Bell. I had heard her speak at a corporate ethics panel years ago and remembered she was the type who didn't flinch when things got ugly. I tracked her down through her firm's site, sent her a secure message with a short summary of what I was dealing with, and within a day, we were sitting in her office downtown. She didn't blink at the weight of it, just asked questions, took notes, and by the end of the meeting, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're going to need thick skin. They'll come at you with everything they've got." "I know," I said. "Good," she replied. "Because so will we." We filed the counterclaim 2 days later: defamation, malicious prosecution, abuse of process. She attached affidavits, digital evidence, email records, and a notarized statement outlining the role my father played in initiating the false claims against me. The lawsuit was filed in state court first, but she had already begun preparing a federal filing as well, under whistleblower protection statutes and financial fraud allegations. Then came the IRS. With the help of the investigator Noah brought in, we compiled a separate binder containing all offshore financial activity tied to Apex Global Holdings. We documented payments, tax evasion indicators, and cross-border wire transfers that hadn't been declared under domestic income filings. We didn't send it anonymously. We sent it under my name, signed and certified, directly to the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, along with a whistleblower complaint backed by formal documentation and legal representation. By the end of that week, I had nothing left to lose. My reputation was already in shreds. My job was gone. My name had been dragged through the mud in meetings I wasn't allowed to attend. But I still had the truth. And now, I had a team. I knew he wouldn't stop. That every move I made would be met with some counterpunch. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't trying to explain myself to people who had already made up their minds. I was going after him. And this time, he wouldn't see it coming. Exactly 1 week after we submitted everything, the story dropped. It wasn't front page on a national outlet or a primetime special, but it didn't need to be. The piece was published by Cascadia Current, a well-respected independent investigative outlet with a reputation for digging into regional corruption. The headline hit harder than I expected. Family business. How a local construction company laundered public money through offshore accounts. Noah wrote it, but it was clear they had gone through every shred of what we gave them and then done their own legwork to confirm it. They'd pulled project records from the city clerk's office, tracked sudden zoning changes, and unexplained variance approvals. They interviewed people anonymously, city employees, contractors, even former staff from Foster Development Group, who quietly corroborated what they could. The article named names. My father, Randall Keyes, a vendor from Portland who had signed fake invoices in exchange for a cut. The offshore company. Even my mother's name appeared, though the piece made it clear that her level of involvement was still being determined. The fallout started immediately. By noon, emails were circulating in city offices. By the next day, the mayor's office issued a formal statement confirming that a financial audit was being launched into all contracts awarded to Foster Development Group over the last 5 years. Public meetings were abruptly canceled. City procurement staff were placed on administrative leave. And just like that, the insulated world my father had built over decades started to buckle under its own weight. The most surreal part was watching it happen from a distance. I wasn't involved anymore, not directly, but I could see the collapse in real time. Business partners began pulling away. Clients released vague statements about reviewing their relationships with the company. One by one, the names that used to show up at family dinners, on golf weekends, at charity events, started to vanish. No phone calls, no denials, just silence. Within 72 hours, 2 of my father's closest business associates disappeared. One had been in charge of overseas logistics and subcontractor vetting, the same person who had likely helped route the money offshore. The other was a longtime advisor who had served as the go-between with the city's infrastructure department. According to the report, both had left the country quietly, one to Belize, the other to Switzerland, just days before the story broke. Meanwhile, Foster Development Group's office windows were covered with blinds, and nobody answered the phone. A reporter snapped a photo of my father walking into the building 2 days later, alone, hunched slightly, face set in that cold expression I knew so well, but he didn't say a word. The comments section of the article exploded. Other publications picked it up. Local radio stations ran segments. People who had once toasted him in banquet halls were now rewriting his name out of brochures and donation plaques. He was still technically free. No charges yet. But it didn't matter. His name, his brand, was now radioactive. The empire he had built with handshakes, backroom deals, and untouchable confidence was suddenly fragile, exposed for what it was. Not a legacy, a lie. And for the first time in my life, he couldn't control the narrative. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. The first few days were mostly procedural, motions, scheduling, a long list of exhibits submitted by both sides. But by the second week, the real weight of it started to come through. What hit hardest wasn't the media attention or the attorneys bickering over language. It was the evidence. The kind you think you're ready for until it's read aloud in a room where your name echoes off the walls. They presented internal records from Foster Development Group, transaction logs, email threads, invoices routed through shell accounts. And then they brought up documents I had never seen before. Authorization letters, fund release forms, wire instructions, each one stamped with a digital signature. Mine. At first, I didn't understand. I stared at the screen as my name appeared on a series of financial authorizations linked to offshore payments. Documents allegedly signed by me, timestamped during the period I had access to the contractor database. But they weren't mine. I hadn't signed a single one of them. The forensic analyst brought in by my lawyer explained that the digital signature was cloned. Not just copied, but embedded into the documents using my firm's credentials. Someone had forged the paperwork using a remote access credential tied to my old audit login. They had used my name to legalize the transactions. My name to launder the money. I sat in my chair as the room buzzed with tension and realized how deep this went. This wasn't just deflection. This was design. I wasn't just the fall guy. I was built into the cover. Then Haley took the stand. She wore a navy dress, her hair perfectly styled, voice soft but clear. They swore her in, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would tell the truth. She looked at me once as she adjusted the microphone. No emotion, just calculation. The prosecutor asked if she was aware of any involvement I had in the company's internal operations. She nodded. Yes, she said. Kevin came to me and said he had access to the contractor files. He told me he found something big. He said it could destroy the company unless he got a cut. The room went quiet. I heard my attorney's pen drop. I thought he was joking at first, she continued. But he kept saying things like, no one will know if we keep it clean, and it's not stealing, it's just compensation. I told him it was insane, and he said, well then maybe I'll just go public and let the media pay me instead. She said it like she had rehearsed it. Smooth. Polished. Just enough detail to sound believable, not so much that it felt scripted. I watched the jurors scribble notes, some of them glancing at me as if they were already starting to believe her. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to ask her why, but I couldn't move. I just stared at her, stunned, as she continued to explain how she tried to warn our father, how she'd kept quiet because she didn't want to ruin me, how she felt conflicted, but ultimately had to do the right thing. She got off the stand like she had done her duty, like she had cleansed herself of something dirty that didn't belong to her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way she had looked at me just before she started talking. Like it meant nothing. Like I was nothing. My father had tried to destroy my name with fake documents. Haley had buried me with her voice. And both of them did it like it was a business decision. By the third week of the trial, things were tense in a way that went beyond legal arguments or courtroom strategy. It felt like something was shifting. My lawyer had been quiet during the first half of the week, focused but restrained, as if she was waiting for the right moment to strike. I didn't know what she was planning, but I could tell something was coming. On Thursday morning, she walked into court with a new binder in her hand, didn't say a word to me, just nodded once like it was finally time. When the judge called the session to order, she requested to introduce a new piece of evidence, an internal email pulled from Foster Development Group's archive, obtained through discovery and verified by a third-party forensic team. It was a short message, just 2 lines. An email from Haley to one of the company's lawyers, dated 5 days before the civil suit against me was filed. Kevin doesn't agree, but if we make him look like a traitor, the court will definitely be on our side. That was it. No ambiguity. No misinterpretation. She had written it. She had suggested the strategy. And it wasn't buried deep in legalese or dressed up in corporate spin. It was plain, calculated, deliberate. The courtroom went silent as it was read aloud. Even the judge looked up. The opposing attorney shifted in his seat. I turned my head just enough to see Haley, sitting a few rows behind the defense table, her face frozen in place. My lawyer requested she be recalled to the stand for additional questioning. She tried to refuse at first. Her attorney objected, citing stress and mental fatigue, but the judge overruled it. She was under subpoena. She would testify. When she stepped back onto the witness stand that afternoon, she looked different. Paler. Her confidence was gone. She adjusted the mic, but her hands were trembling. The oath was read again. She nodded, barely audible. The questioning started gently. My lawyer didn't go in hard. She asked about the email. Haley said she didn't remember writing it. Then she was shown the metadata, timestamp, IP, device ID. There was no way around it. That's when something cracked. She went quiet. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The courtroom waited. A full 15 seconds passed before she whispered, "He made me do it." The prosecutor asked her to repeat herself. She looked directly at me for the first time since the trial started, her voice shaking. "Dad made me do it. He said Kevin would destroy everything. That the company, the family name, everything would fall apart if we didn't act first. He told me what to say. He said if I testified against Kevin, no one would question me. That I'd just be protecting the family." Her eyes were red now. She blinked, and tears finally started to fall. "I didn't want to," she said. "I didn't think he'd actually go this far. But once we started, once we filed the complaint, it was too late to back out. He said if I changed my story, I'd be the one going to jail. That Kevin would drag all of us down unless we made the court believe he was the one trying to take us down first." The judge asked for a recess. But the damage was done. In one moment, the story they had built around me collapsed under its own weight. My sister, their perfect front woman, had cracked open the truth in front of everyone. She walked off the stand sobbing. Not the performative kind. Not a show. Real collapse. The kind that comes when a person realizes they've crossed a line they can't come back from. The verdict came down on a Tuesday afternoon, just past 3 o'clock. The courtroom was quiet in that heavy, breath-held kind of way. Everyone waiting for the weight to drop. I didn't move. I just sat there, hands folded, staring straight ahead as the judge read the ruling. The court found Foster Development Group's internal practices to be fraudulent and manipulative, with clear evidence of financial misconduct, forged documentation, and deliberate attempts to obstruct justice. The charges against me were dropped immediately, and the judge issued a formal statement clearing my name of all accusations, stating that not only had I not stolen company data, but I had actively attempted to bring criminal activity to light. The moment it was read aloud, I felt something in my chest finally unclench. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was more like the end of pressure, like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just closed my eyes for a second and let the silence settle. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, the state attorney general's office confirmed that the case had been referred to federal authorities. The evidence of wire fraud, falsified corporate records, and misuse of public funds triggered an automatic handoff to the U.S. Attorney's Office. My father, Thomas Foster, was placed under formal investigation for financial crimes, including conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and laundering of public funds through international accounts. The maximum sentence for the charges he now faced was 10 years in federal prison. The courtroom cleared out slowly that day, but by the time I stepped onto the courthouse steps, reporters were already gathering. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. The headline had already written itself. By the end of the week, 2 more city officials were suspended, pending investigation. Randall Keyes resigned from his position for personal reasons, but the mayor's office confirmed that a full audit of infrastructure contracts had begun. What started as one company's corruption was turning into a citywide anti-corruption probe, with multiple agencies involved. The Office of Inspector General opened a formal inquiry. Subpoenas were issued. Records were frozen. The company my father built, the image he had spent decades curating, was unraveling in public view. And my name, once twisted into a lie, now stood on court record as the one who refused to stay quiet. It was a week after the verdict when my mother showed up at my apartment. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since everything started unraveling. I almost didn't open the door when I saw her through the peephole, standing there in a beige coat, her hands clutched together like she was trying to hold something inside from spilling out. When I opened it, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, eyes red, face drawn, and then she started crying. Not the quiet, restrained tears I remembered from her more controlled moments growing up. These were messy, shoulder-shaking sobs, and she didn't try to stop them. I didn't invite her in. I stood there holding the door, watching her break down on the threshold like a confession. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice cracked with every word. "I swear to you, Kevin, I didn't know what your father was doing. I never looked at the accounts. I just signed what he asked. I trusted him. I never imagined he would. I didn't know." She reached out, like she wanted to hold my arm, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have asked more questions. I should have protected you. I let this happen. I let him do this to you." I didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear the cars passing on the street behind her, people going about their lives like none of this had ever touched them. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But there was too much damage between us now. Too many moments when she looked away instead of asking why. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Maybe someday. But not now." She nodded, slowly, as if she already knew that was coming. Then she turned and walked away without asking me to reconsider. As for Haley, the court gave her a suspended sentence. Perjury, obstruction, conspiracy to defraud. The judge took into account her cooperation and the pressure she was under, but it still went on the record. She avoided prison, but not the consequences. She moved 2 states away, changed jobs, kept a low profile. Last I heard, she was working under a different last name, trying to disappear from the story she helped create. The family that once prided itself on loyalty, image, and strength in numbers was gone. What remained wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And sometimes, that's the only place left to start. It's been a year since the verdict, and sometimes I still wake up thinking I'm back in the middle of it, still suspended from work, still waiting for a judge to say my name without disgust, still carrying the weight of my father's decisions. But that chapter closed, even if the scars haven't. After the dust settled and the federal investigation spread across half the city, I knew I couldn't go back to auditing firms or sitting behind spreadsheets pretending none of it had changed me. So I started something new. I took the settlement money I got after the charges were dropped, matched it with a few donations from people who believed in what I stood for, and I launched a nonprofit. We called it Clear Ledger. It's small, scrappy, and not particularly well-funded, but we investigate financial abuse in the public sector. We work with whistleblowers. We build cases. We train city employees to recognize red flags before things spiral. We don't sell stories to the press. We pass our findings to state and federal oversight committees, quietly, carefully, so people like my father don't see it coming. Last month, a professor from Columbia Law School emailed me. He said my case is now part of their ethics and corruption curriculum. They teach it as a classic case of internal corporate corruption with family overtones, a real-world example of what happens when business, power, and personal loyalty get so tangled that people forget where the line is. I didn't reply to the email right away. I just sat with it. I'm not proud of how any of it happened, but I am proud that I didn't stay silent. So here we are. A family destroyed, a legacy undone, and a new path carved out of the wreckage. Thanks for reading all the way through. It's been a long story. What would you have done in my place? Do you think I was too harsh on them? Too soft? I'm genuinely curious. How do you see this kind of betrayal when it's not just business, but blood? Let me know in the comments. I'd really like to hear your take.